if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Australian Veteran News.
Yeah, okay. So I've got the grand title of being the Editor-in-Chief of the Australian Veteran News. I'm not really quite sure what that means. I think that means that I get to choose the style and the tone and make sure that we sort of stick with that editorial style that we've chosen for the site. And we're going for, I guess, a more serious type of news content that will be of interest to Australian veterans and their families. And I guess the main thing that we want to achieve is to be an independent voice in the veteran community that's not sort of controlled by any particular interest area, but also we have, I guess, the ability to reach into the community, to understand what's going on at a grassroots level, but also to have a look at policy at the government level. We're also interested in what's going on in the larger ex-service organisations who have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility as well to deliver services and outcomes for veterans and their families. And so that's the role we want to play. And we're trying to provide, I guess, coverage of stories and analysis and opinion that will help shape some of the conversations that we believe need to be had in the veteran community, and also to get government and the larger ex-service organisations with the money and the power and the ear of government to start paying attention to the needs of those veterans and their families.
It is certainly a very noisy space, isn't it?
There's certainly a lot, as you know, Trent. When we did the Shout Out program a couple of years ago, or for a couple of years, sponsored by Melbourne Legacy, there was a very large number of ex-services charities registered, and there's something well over 2,000. And when we did some in-depth research into that, we discovered very few of them actually did anything. And they may have done maybe one little fundraiser or something like that, and then they stopped, but they stayed on the register. There are a lot of charities that purport to be doing things for veterans and seem to be doing very little in actual fact. So I think our attention ought to be on the larger ones who actually have some history, so Legacy and RSL in particular, but there are a few younger ones that are coming through that actually are doing some very good things as well. Making sure that they're understanding what's going on out there, and perhaps they need to get a bit of a push once in a while as well. And we've certainly done that recently in some of the articles we've put out, particularly around governance and what they're doing strategically. And in fact, some of them actually don't seem to have a strategy that they're operating. So we're calling that out as well. So it's a little painful for them. It's a little painful for us to also to see it happening. And we hopefully, if we get the right conversation started, then they might do something about it and we'll get better outcomes for everybody.
And so talking about delivering outcomes, there was a recent initiative, the Veteran Wellbeing Survey, that was undertaken by Australian Veterans News. Could you tell us a little bit about the objectives of the survey?
All right, Trent. So we've been interested in the wellbeing of veterans for quite some time, and going back to the time that you and I worked on the Shout Out program, we actually put a model forward around veterans and family wellbeing that's very close to the model that's been adopted by DVA, and it's got about 7 different elements to it. And one of the things that struck me and you and I when we were talking about it was that there's very little data on what is actually the status of veteran wellbeing across Australia. Now, to DVA's credit, they've put out a wellbeing strategy, which I think is a terrific initiative. And the strategy outlines their 7 areas and so forth. So what's missing, though, is any sort of real information and engagement with the community around how they're going and what's needed. Now, I'm sure that sort of thing is coming, but my observation is that while they develop the right approach to do these things, it takes such a long time to actually get any information and to get any momentum. And we've seen the results of some of the efforts of DVA surveys recently. If you have a look at our website, you'll see an article about one of the surveys they put in around engagement, which was an absolute failure of engagement in actual fact. And so our idea was to put out a survey quickly. It's not, I'll put it out there, I'm not saying it's a scientific survey, I'm not saying that we've got a perfect sample, but we really wanted to get at least some indication from the veteran community about how they're going on those dimensions of wellbeing, just as a snapshot, just to get the conversation started and to potentially find out areas that we might need to delve into a little bit more deeply. And I think as a result of what we've done, I think we've achieved a little bit of that. And I think we've certainly got a good starting point of where we need to go with for future information gathering and so forth.
Yeah, the results were certainly very interesting. But before we get into them, could you just tell us a little bit about how the survey was designed?
Yeah, so the survey was designed basically around the areas of wellbeing that were put together in the DVA strategy. And I'll just turn around. I'll just make sure I can remember what they were exactly. But the questions actually dealt with each area in turn. And the 7 areas were, so there was recognition and respect, health outcomes, education skills, housing, financial outcomes, social outcomes, community connection, and employment. So they're probably the key areas that we decided to create a single simple question around, not try to delve into all the various elements of the details of each one of those areas. We wanted to just ask a really simple question. And for those who indicated something in a negative way, we wanted to give them the opportunity to make a comment about what could be improved or what the issue was from their perspective. So it was a very simple approach just to initiate and develop an initial understanding of the situation for some folk out there.
So having seen the data, I was lucky enough to go through it and have a really good look at it. Yeah. The amount of comments was certainly surprising to myself. How did you feel that the comments resonated once we closed off the survey and finished up and reviewed the data? Yeah,
look, the comments, I was really surprised. None of the comments were not mandatory. They were all optional because, one of the things in survey design is you want to keep your survey where you can as simple as possible. So I'd rather get an indication if somebody is happy or unhappy and then give them the opportunity to make a comment rather than force them to make a comment, because you end up with this situation where people will abandon the survey because they just find it too laborious to do. So the comments were in every case an optional thing for people to fill out. And of all the people that, so we had 288 responses to the survey within a little bit less than 4 weeks actually. It was a really quick response and a strong response. And of anybody who had an opportunity to make a comment, probably about 70% did, perhaps a little bit more. So we ended up with all up, counting all the comments in all the sections, over 1,600 comments made. Now, some of them were fairly brief, but most of them actually were quite thoughtful and at least a paragraph or a few sentences, that kind of thing. So we could certainly go into that data a little bit more and develop a little bit of an understanding about the sentiment by the language that was used and the sorts of things that people have said within their comments to us about those areas of wellbeing.
It certainly has provided a big body of resources, hasn't it? Considering how quickly it was put together and how many respondents. Getting that a number of comments in response to the survey, I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, look, I was actually surprised. I mean, and one of the things about it is, with the number of responses we had, the important thing was that we used some of the magic of social media and some really deep engagement sort of techniques, that aren't commonly used. And we found that we were able to get a very, very good reach across the country. So I like to say, because of we're able to sort of monitor the analytics from the website perspective, we could see the locations where people were logging in from and match that to the fact that they were doing the survey. I can confidently say that we've had responses from, Geraldton to Goondiwindi to Gundagai, and everything in between. We had people from all those places. And, obviously we'd had some good responses from the main centres as well, but a lot of folk out in the regional areas are actually participating in this, and somehow through some sort of the viral means of social media and so forth, we're able to get a wider reach into areas and interesting little clusters in little towns that obviously there's a few veteran communities hanging around, and you could see that there is some activity and some localised engagement, and that was no surprise to us, because when we did that work a couple of years ago, we did an analysis of veteran activity on social media, and we found that there is a huge, almost hidden amount of activity going on, and it's outside of the realms of what DVA and ex-service organisations are aware of and see. And so there is this, this opportunity to actually understand that and do something with it. And fortunately for us, we've worked out how to do a little bit of that, and we've had some very, very good responses from those folk. So that's been a very, very good outcome, I think, for us.
I'd certainly agree with that. And in addition to the broad spread geographically of respondents, can you give us a bit more of an insight into what respondents generally were like, where they come from in a geographical sense, but in their service history, in their experiences, anything like that?
Yeah, well, we've got some data on that, and I think we have an opportunity. I think our next release of information is about the metadata, or the information behind the scenes. There's definitely some things there, and there's some other questions that we haven't, that we collected along the way that we haven't reported, that don't necessarily relate to wellbeing, such as questions such as do you belong to an ex-service organisation? So there's some other data that we collected while we had the opportunity, or took the opportunity to do so. But in terms of the spread of veterans, we've had one of the questions was asking them about their service history, and there was quite a good number. I can't remember the exact percentage, but there was a small percentage, probably less than 10%, that were actually still serving, who responded to us. We had a complete spread and a fairly even spread of people who nominated discharge dates. I think the earliest was 1965 through to 2020. So, and it was a very good and even spread throughout those years. There obviously were clusters. So there was a cluster of people in the sort of the mid 60s. So I guess there was probably a bunch of friends or mates sharing some information around it. So you're going to get those things, and you will get obviously some distortions in the information and the data that we've collected. So as I said, it may not be a perfect sample, and it may not be the perfect information set, but because of that, but we've also been able to, I guess, reach into actual community clusters and get and understand their sentiment of how they're going. And there were some interesting outcomes from some of the things they've said, as you can see from the data if you look at the our report on it, our initial report.
It's certainly a broad spread of experience there. Was there anything that sort of stood out in the responses that surprised you, knowing that both myself and you have got a pretty deep insight into the veterans community after the work we've done on Shout Out?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things, it's a subtle thing. I wasn't surprised by a lot of the results, except I did see some things that could easily be overlooked or misunderstood, and I sort of think of it in the terms of lies, damn lies, and statistics. One of the results that you'll see is the question about are your healthcare needs? Do you think your healthcare needs are being met? Something similar to that. And you've got about 79%, nearly 80% of respondents said yes. And I thought it was a pretty strong response. And then you get 20% saying no, and I thought, well, that's unusual. Why? You can almost look at that and go, well, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good outcome. And I'd be worried if anybody actually thought that off the bat, because it's not a good outcome. When I look at some of the comments that people made around poor health outcomes, I realise from that knowledge that you and I have, and what we were talking about before, is that these people are talking about not having access to things that they actually have access to. And it means to me that, it says to me that they're, from our respondents, potentially 20% of them are falling through the cracks. It's also an indication that some of those folk, are not very well, there's a failure in engagement as well. The other thing that I think was interesting, and this is sort of the data behind it, when you actually dive into it and you read through all the comments and you look at what people have said, you can see that the veteran community, and particularly people in remote areas, are hungry for the opportunity to be engaged with, and for someone to ask them the question, how are you going in these areas? And it was interesting. I asked a question about housing, and one of the early responses was, well, I'm fine. I live in my own van in a caravan park, and the wait for government housing is too long. Now that says a lot. I mean, it says something about the resilience of the individuals involved, and they're happy to talk about what's happened to them in their housing situation. But it also says something about what's going on for some people in the community, and it's good for some, and it's not so good for others. And we had everything from one end to the other. One respondent was talking about how they use their deployment monies to buy houses and set themselves up and do very well financially, and some people actually had benefited quite significantly from some good decisions they made in their young days while they're serving. And some people obviously didn't take advantage or didn't have those advantages. So the next thing to do with that information, and this is where the extra analysis really has to go into, is to actually match and understand what the patterns are in that data. So from those people, the 20% who are saying they didn't have good outcomes, do they have anything in common? And so we can actually look at them from the perspective, well, when did they discharge? Is there something common about their discharge date? What else can we draw from that knowledge? And going back to that comment I made earlier, Trent, about the other thing that was surprising about the level of engagement that people were hungry for, the thing that really made that clear to me was we gave people an option to provide us with their email address, and we asked them if they wanted to if they would be prepared to be contacted further and to discuss their wellbeing with Australian Veteran News. And we had an enormous response of people who did that. So we had about probably about 30% of the people ticked that box and gave us an email address. So we've had I think about 130 people who sort of said they'd be willing to talk to us. So we've got an opportunity to use that to perhaps do something a little bit more focused, say maybe focus groups or something like that. Once we understand what are the things that we need to dive into a little bit more, and what other things are really worthwhile to sort of extract out of this. But again, I go back to the issue that I have with this is, we're just a little veteran news site, a couple of blokes and a bit of support from people like Leo D'Angelo Fisher and people like that, who are lending their time and getting behind the project that we're undertaking here. These sorts of things need to be undertaken by organisations with resources and the ability to do it well and to do it properly. And we'll do it, but I think this is the issue that we have, is why are we doing it and why is it left to us? And I guess that's the punch in the ribs that I want to give to DVA and RSL and organisations like that who have the ability and should be looking at these things and advocating on behalf of veterans, and they're not doing it. So I guess that's part of the thing that we want to raise up as a topic, rather than actually necessarily have to be the ones to write in and save the day. I mean, we just want to get people working on it, and we'll demonstrate potentially one or two ways you might do it, but not necessarily need to be we're not really equipped to be in the position to take full responsibility for it. And I think that's the thing that I want to get across to our audiences. We'll try to move this forward, and we're extremely grateful for people telling us their stories, because that's what will help move it forward. But we've really got to demand a lot more from our ex-service organisations. We've got to demand a lot more from DVA in particular, and get them to get their programs properly focused and to get their engagement right, sort of break down some of the barriers and the bureaucratic barriers that they've created, and around their national consultation frameworks and things like that. I mean, it's from my perspective, some of that stuff looks like a bit of a disaster, a bit of a bureaucrat's dream about how to run things, but not necessarily doing anything effective for the veteran community at all. So
I'd certainly agree that Australian Veterans News runs on the smell of an oily rag, but I think it's been going for almost 3 months now, and I think we're punching above our weight, and we've certainly got the our level of engagement's certainly high, and we're certainly starting to prick the ears off of some of those larger organisations. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 3 months hold.
Yeah, look, I think you're right, Trent. I suspect we're probably a bit of an annoyance to them because we've been, I mean, off the bat, we've been quite critical. And I mean, they bloody well deserve it as far as I'm concerned. So, you know, they've been asleep at the wheel for a long time, and they need to go through some change. They've got some fantastic talent available to them if they want to use it. But they're, you know, they're a bit stuck in their ways at the moment. And I hope some of those organisations will actually wake up and make things different. There's a lot of momentum though, and there's a lot of things holding them back. Yes, we're punching above our weight. I think the momentum has gotten away from us. Actually, it's very hard to sort of put this into balance. And I mean, we've got, you know, you and I have got day jobs running other companies. So we've got a strategy business. I know you've got your advertising business. So, you know, this is it's a distraction. It's a welcome distraction. I'm certainly enjoying the opportunity to be part of it. Yeah, it's something that requires, I think, a lot more. I mean, I think that it's shown us that because there's such a need and a vacuum, particularly around engagement and particularly around you know, an independent voice. There's a need for an independent voice. We're filling the vacuum and we can't stop now. So, you know, it's underway.
Yeah. It's been certainly, we've been getting sucked along for the ride ever since we hit launch on the site, haven't we?
Yeah. It's been a little bit more of a wild ride than I anticipated, but there you go. It hasn't sort of slowly sort of built up or anything. It's just gotten away from us, which is great.
Started at full pace for sure. So what's next in regards to the survey data? What are the plans?
Okay, so look, I think what we need to do, there's as I mentioned before, there's another layer of analysis. I mean, we could look at this data for another year, quite frankly. I'm talking to some colleagues at Swinburne University to see if I can get some support for some independent review of the data and to validate, I guess, some of our views, and I'm in the process of doing that at the moment, which I think will just give a little bit of extra rigour around it. So it's not just an opinion piece type thing where we're trying to use the information that's been given to us from the community and use it in a meaningful way. And we're not pushing a particular agenda. And I want to make sure people understand that that's not our intention. Our agenda is really to reveal what's going on, and if needs be, show organisations who might be a little bit stale in this area of engagement and so forth that there may be some things that they could do to improve their efforts. So there's certainly that. I think we'll be doing probably a sort of a focus or a deep dive in each area. There is, as we said, there's well over 1,600 comments being made against those areas. So there will be some analysis around that, and we could be able to use some tools to help us develop a better understanding of the sentiment and the issues and themes and so forth. So there'll be a little bit of that. I think the other thing that we might do is be able to, things that really emerge very quickly from the information that we've got. We might start thinking about whether we want to bring some focus groups together and really delve into individual experiences and stories about those issues of potentially homelessness, the issues of the financial well-being and those sorts of things, why people are falling through the cracks from a health perspective, why is it they don't know what's available to them, and why aren't they accessing those services and those sorts of things. There are comments I think that were made that I think will warrant some investigation of their own. Some people in rural areas are talking about how difficult it is for them to find a stable GP who gets to understand them, working with them and DBA and things like that. So there's some areas there that I think are probably worth highlighting and sort of try to bring to the fore of some of our discussions and articles that we put out in the future. So I think that's probably the next step with this. Yeah.
I think drilling down and getting those personal stories certainly will resonate, because I know a lot of the times people just see numbers, but and then frequently people forget that there's actual individuals behind these numbers that are experiencing sometimes not the best support from any of the agencies that are meant to be looking after them. So I really like the idea of digging into those focus groups and teasing out some of those stories to put faces to, with the numbers of the surveys teased out.
Absolutely, Trent. I mean, that was our whole approach with the shout out campaign. I think it worked very well. I think stories are the things that people can understand, and they can get to know the individuals and understand their case. And they serve as a very good example of, the struggles that some veterans actually have. Now, not everybody's struggling. Some people do very, very well from their career in the military and have and grow significantly from it. And some people, have a little bit of both worlds. And, but one of the things I found in common when interviewing for some of my other research about some of the challenges that veterans had, particularly in transition around jobs and employment, I asked as part of the research protocol, would they do it again? And even people who've had the most serious of problems at the end of it said, yes, they do it in a heartbeat. And in one case, one bloke said to me, I've got my gear packed and ready to go, and this was a guy who was medically discharged because of reasons of mental health and was very unlikely to ever get back into the military again. But clung on to the dream that, one day they might want to break the glass and, pull this guy back into service, and they would do it in a heartbeat. So, there's an enormous amount of loyalty, I think, amongst veterans for their mates and the people they've served with. And I guess mostly it is mostly a positive experience, but there is some real tragedies in terms of the community and the letdowns that have occurred because of poor policy, poor engagement, inattentive ex-service organisations focusing on things willy-nilly and not using their power and their geographic reach as best they can for the benefit of the veterans and the community that they say that they've been set up to serve. And so, we've got to look into that, and we've got to highlight that. And once we've done that, then our job is done.
I think that engagement piece is so important, because a lot of the times it's not that the services aren't available, it's that they're so difficult to find. And I think that that's one of the things that I've found very frustrating about working and discovering more about veterans and the veteran community.
I asked what were the barriers preventing people accessing the services that they need, and about 60% indicated that they thought most veterans don't know where to start or who to contact.
It's very telling, isn't it?
60%. So that's another layer of data that we need to put out. So there's that sort of thing going on there, and then you link that with the questions around, do you belong to an ex-service organisation? And quite a large number of veterans, despite how important their military service and their career was at that time to their lives, a big part of their lives, and they still identify strongly with it. There's quite a large number, something like more than 40%, who are not part of an ex-service organisation. And in the comments, many of them said, I would never be a part of an ex-service organisation because they don't look after us and they don't represent me. So there's some very strong negative sentiment, and I can understand it to a point, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I think if we can shift some focuses here and there, I think we could get a better cooperation between the members of the community and their needs, what the ex-service organisations are actually doing, and not just the tokenism, but the serious stuff, and the advocacy that they need to do. And I'm not talking about advocacy for pensions and things like that. I'm talking about advocacy for bigger things, and get that cooperation with state and federal governments. Those things are not working particularly well at all, and there's a fair bit of tokenism going on, and we can address some of those, and we'll probably be addressing some of those in future articles that we'll write about, because we've got some investigations going on at the moment, particularly in the jobs area and that sort of thing. But so there'll be items out around that, but there is definitely a need to do something a little bit more in that area.
And is there any message you'd like to send out to the people that responded to the survey?
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, it's a brave thing. I just think it's a brave thing for people. I mean, it was an anonymous survey, in as much that you didn't have to tell us who you were, but such a large number of people actually did tell us who they were, and they told us things about their lives that things that most people would want to keep very personal, particularly things around their housing situation, their health, those sorts of things. They are the ones making the difference by telling and sharing those stories. And I'm personally extremely grateful for that, because I know that it's just so important. And I suspect that they know that it's important as well. And I guess we'll promise to do our best to get their story out there, and to tell the story as best we can, and to push for good quality policy making and getting the government to listen and engage properly with the community. And until it's done, we've got a bit of work to do.
We certainly have. And if people would like to find out more about Australian Veterans News and the survey, the Veterans Wellbeing Survey, what should they do?
Well, it's very simple, Trent. They just go to australianveterannews.com, and the website's there. There's a link to the survey results there, number of stories and that sort of thing. And we've got a broad range of things. We're not just dealing with wellbeing. We've got an arts segment. We're dealing with a range of other hot issues as well, that will be of interest, and a little bit of what's going on in insider information, insider stuff going on in different ex-service organisations and things that people find intriguing, I'm sure. But really, it's all, our focus is not to be a gossip site or a site where we bash one party or another, but we really want to pull things out, and we want to expose some critical flaws so that they can be actually addressed and dealt with. And so that's what we're going to do, and we'll just keep doing it. And hopefully, when there's good stories to tell, we'll tell those stories as well.
They'll be the most satisfying ones to write, I'm sure, Mark.
That'll be fantastic. It'll be really good. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time today, and it was really nice to find out more about the Wellbeing Survey, and we'll keep an eye out for more updates.
Thanks, Trent. Great. Good to talk to you today, mate. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Bye.